Randell Adjei is an entrepreneur, speaker, and spoken word practitioner who uses his gifts to empower. Randell is the founder of one of Toronto's largest youth-led initiatives, Reaching Intelligent Souls Everywhere, or R.I.S.E Edutainment. In 2018, R.I.S.E received the Toronto Arts Foundation's Mayor's Youth Arts Award. He was also recently appointed Ontario's first Poet Laureate. In addition, Randell is the author of I Am Not My Struggles, a powerful anthology released in 2018. Randell was also named CBC's Metro Morning's Torontonian of the Year in 2015, and Now Magazine's Local Hero in May 2017. And in 2020, Randell even opened up for President Barack Obama at the Economic Club of Canada. So please join me in welcoming Randell to the stage.
Let's hear it for Randell.
Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Words are powerful. Would you agree? Words can bring us up, or words can bring us. Amazing. And I'd love if you could repeat after me. I'm a very big advocate for affirmations. And as a poet, words mean a lot to me. And if you could repeat after me, I'd love it. I know some of you have your mouths full, and that's okay. I am amazing. I am special. I am unique. I am gifted. I am resilient. I am worthy. I am excellent because I am capable. I'd love if you could turn to the person beside you, left, right, behind, and front, and just tell them you are excellent because you are capable. So often, most of the times that I've heard words growing up was not always in the most positive light. And I think for me, it took some time for me to really be able to recognize the power of words and to use my words in a way that I felt was best possible in the direction of truth and love. And if anything I've learned through words and through life and throughout my journey, it's just this, like we all have this opportunity to transform our adversities into purpose and into power, but it really is a matter of our perspective and how it is we choose to move forward and see it. So I want to ask you, what is your why? What is your why? What is your why? And if anybody cares to answer, I'm very open to hear, but what is your why? And your community, beautiful. Can we give it up? Give it up for her, please. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Beautiful. I love it. Can we give it up? Give it up for them. Anyone else? Take one or two more? Yep. Beautiful. Give it up. Give it up. Give it up. Last one. Oh, two. We'll take two more at this table here. Love it. Please give it up one more time. And last but certainly not least. Okay, look at that. Look at that at the same table, just on different sides, huh? I love it. Yeah, sure. Yes, come on now for the culture. Indeed, indeed, indeed. And I think it's really important to think about what our why is, because oftentimes when we're in a direction and, pursuing our passions, pursuing the things that we love, or are walking towards our destiny, along the journey, it's easy to forget what your why is. Along the journey, it's easy to really not be focused on how to get there, because the reality is in every adversity that we go through, regardless of every adversity that you go through, the reality is there's a seed of opportunity. There's something that you can learn, something that you can grow from, something that you can take away from every adversity. And one thing I know is in each and every single one of you can agree that you've experienced some hardship at some point in time, right? And the reality is adversity just does not discriminate. Adversity does not care, but there's seeds of opportunity in every adversity that we go through. Seeds of opportunity in every adversity. I want you to take a moment to understand there's a seed, the analogy of a seed. I love this analogy. When we think of a seed, we often think about what it can produce. We think about a seed turning into a flower, turning into a rose bush, turning into a vegetable, a plant, you name it. But the reality is, in order for that seed to turn into what it can become, it needs to be buried into the darkness of soil. And in that darkness of soil, it will crack, it will break, And the potential inside of that seed will root itself in the darkness, and only in the darkness can it find its light. And we are like those seeds. Sometimes we are buried into the darkness of soil, not knowing that we are in darkness, that we're experiencing darkness, but it's the potential that comes out of us that we can root into that darkness, that we can learn to appreciate light. At the end of the day, how do you appreciate light without darkness? How do you know what is good without bad? Right? And this is the thing about life. And I think because it does not discriminate, it doesn't care about how old you are, it doesn't care about the color of your skin, where in the world you live, because adversity is inevitable. The question I want to ask you is, what do you do with adversity then? What is it that you choose to do with adversity then? I'm a poet. I love poetry. Y'all like poetry? All right. It's my first time performing in person in a while, and I'm so happy to be here and share some poetry with you. Come on, make some noise, make some noise. And so this poem is called Brokenness. I know too many broken people, broke into pieces they think they cannot fix. Like shattered glass, they may cut you when you try to uplift, slicing the helping hands, hoping to heal the harm that's happened to them. They often hurt in silence, then smile in your face today, but tomorrow you may hear of how their brokenness has escalated into acts of violence. We often judge these broken people and then call them names, label them, sometimes forgetting that, like flipping a coin, they too can change. But what does it really mean to be broken when it is broken people that have helped mend the world? I realize that in our brokenness is when our true lives unfurl. Because see, brokenness is a sign of recreation. It is a sign of growth. But we fear brokenness because we fear the unknown and the uncertainty. But brokenness can piece our wholes together perfectly, sometimes permanently. After all, if you've never known brokenness, then how would you know when you were whole? If you've never been broken, then how would you measure your growth? Thank you. I just want to reiterate again one more time that if you've never known brokenness, then how would you know when you were whole? If you've never been broken, then how would you measure your growth? I think it's really important for me as I kind of hold that thought in my mind that I know when I'm going through something tough and difficult, it's not because I did anything wrong, not because I deserve what's happening to me. It's more because there's something to learn from it. There's something to grow from. I want you to take a moment to think about a difficult moment that you went through. And think about what the lessons that you've learned and who you've become in the process. Do you just see problems as problems? Do you see adversity as just adversity? I know I don't, because every change maker that lives in this world is driven by the problems and the adversities that they're facing or they're looking to combat and conquer. And ultimately, I'm not giving praise to the difficulties we go through, but for me, a person like myself, it wasn't for my hardships and the difficulties that I went through, then I wouldn't be the person I am today. I'm motivated by the difficulties, the hardships, because they really prepared me to be where I am today. And if you think about yourself, I'm sure you can attest and say, yeah, those difficulties really did make me who I am today, right? So I want to share a little bit of my journey. I was a really angry young person, got into a lot of trouble at a very young age. In grade 6, my principal said I was one of the worst students she had in 31 years of teaching. I was angry. I was really upset about the world. I lived in a very difficult community, in a community that didn't have many opportunities, in a community where people were looking to do things for us because of funding, but not things with us because they didn't want to understand what we were going through. That was my reality. When I went to school, I was looked at because I lived in those buildings and I didn't live in the nice houses. I was looked at a certain way. So I was angry. And I showed up at school angry. And it's not because I was a bad person. But the great thing about it is I was transferred from that school. When I got transferred from that school, I went to a new school in grade 8. And I met this teacher who, I want you to imagine you're a second-year teacher, records of a 13-year-old boy who's been suspended and who's had trouble with the law. You might think he's a troublemaker. You might think he's angry. You might think a number of different things. This teacher, what I love about Miss Samartzis is she sat me down and she took the time to want to understand who I was. She asked questions, and that changed my whole perspective. And she helped me learn about poetry. I discovered poetry. And finally, I was able to express myself in a way that I didn't feel judged for. The pen helped me tell my story. And the paper listened when no one else would. Because everyone just wrote me off and said Randell's a troublemaker. So I want to fast forward. Poetry was something that I picked up, dropped, picked up. And the third time was a beautiful moment for me to really hone in on my craft. I realized that in my community, after a near-death experience, that there was a lot of anger, a lot of violence. And in the process of doing so, what I recognized was that I was not alone, that there was a lack of safe spaces in my community for people to express themselves in a positive way. How many of you think safe spaces are huge and really important? So necessary. And I agree. In a community that I grew up in where nobody really cared very much, I figured I had to create something, and it's called R.I.S E. R.I.S E stands for Reaching Intelligent Souls Everywhere. It's a platform that before the pandemic was weekly for young people to come and just express themselves through poetry, music, art, dance, acting, you name it. In 2014, we made a bit of a pivot, and we started focusing on building artists to be more professional and helping them get to employment opportunities and developing it. So first was safe spaces, then it was developing artists. And then the third aspect of it was really creating a social enterprise that could help artists make money. Because as you know, artists get hit hard, especially through this pandemic, right? And so that was a really transformative moment for me. And in doing so, I recognize not only can the power of art and self-expression really change community and build community, but I think what it opened my eyes to was that everything that I'd gone through at that point in time was necessary for me to be the leader that I became at that point in time. And so I think something that I think is really important was being the observer. I stepped back from my reality and I became the observer. And if this was Randell, this is Randell. I'm holding two things right now, so just bear with me, all right? So if this is Randell, this is who I was. And I say Randell as a character, because what I believe is that we are all the authors and the protagonists of our own story. We are all the directors and the main characters at the same time. We are creating the lives we live, but we are also living in that life. So by the choices we make and ultimately how we respond to the choices we make, this is how powerful we are. We are really that powerful. And so by being the observer, I got to step back and recognize that I was still working through some trauma, that the community was doing some trauma work. And I recognized that I could do something more and really push it a little bit further. So vulnerability is something that I love vulnerability. We live in a society where we often see vulnerability as a sign of weakness, that if you're vulnerable, that you're weak, you don't deserve to be respected. You don't deserve to be seen as someone who's strong. But I believe vulnerability takes so much courage, so much strength, so much bravery to bare your soul and show the world who you really are. So can we just give a round of applause for vulnerability? And, you know, the growth mindset is something that has really helped me in that process. And ultimately, are many of you familiar with the growth mindset? Beautiful. I love it. I hope so. And if you aren't, I hope you do. It's a book written by Carol Dweck that really speaks on, we often, instead of seeing the hardships and the challenges that we go through and being defined by them, we can allow them to design us or to prepare us. If you haven't read the book, I've read it 4 times. I'm just going to I don't often read books 4 times, but this book right here, it's a beautiful book. It's an amazing book and so necessary if you haven't read it. But in comparison, the growth mindset is the process, understanding that there's a process to get to somewhere, to get to the destination, as opposed to thinking that that's the end all be all. So the fixed mindset is more so, this is where I am. I'm stuck in who I am and I'm stuck in my abilities. I can't grow anymore. This is who I am. This is where I am. And there's no more growth from here. And I think there's a huge distinction between the growth and the fixed mindset. And I think if you haven't taken the time, please do, understand how they apply. Some of us may have growth mindset tendencies, and some of us may have other fixed mindset tendencies in other areas and other aspects of our lives, but worth reading. So how do we transform pain into power? How do you take this adversity, this pain, this difficulty, and how are you able to then transfer that into an opportunity, into power, as I call it? Another one of my favorite books is called The 4 Agreements. Has anybody read the book, The 4 Agreements, before? Okay. I love to read, so I might be sharing a couple other books with y'all, but this one is an amazing book. The first principle says, be impeccable with your word. And to be impeccable with your word is simply anytime you speak, that you speak in the direction of truth and love, that you don't speak ill will about yourself or about anyone else. And even before we get to speech, thoughts, the power of a thought. There's a quote that I heard that said, if you knew the power of a positive thought, you would never allow a negative thought to ever juxtapose or change the way you view life. And I thought that was such a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to recognize and to see, because ultimately the thoughts that we have turn into words, and then the words that we have turn into actions, and these actions turn to habits, and these habits turn to characters, and these characters turn to who we are at the end of the day. But it starts with a simple thought. And I think it's really important to recognize that. The second says, don't take anything personal, probably the hardest one of it all. But it's to say that if anyone does anything to you, it's not because of you, it's because of where they were. So, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you're feeling really good. The way you approach certain people is different than when you wake up in the morning not feeling so good. You approach people a little bit differently. So we can't take anything personal that people do to us because that is on them and it's not about us, right? What they're going through, they may project, as many of us do, projecting our emotions onto other people. But there's something really radical about seeing that person and where they are and having empathy for where they are, but recognizing what they're projecting onto us does not define us. And that's not who we are ultimately, right? The third is don't make any assumptions. And the fourth is always do your best. I want you to think of 2 years ago today. Think of where you were 2 years ago today and think about where you are now. And I want to ask you, what would you say to that person? What advice would you give to that person that you were 2 years ago, just as the pandemic was about to start? Anyone? I'd love to know. What would you tell that person that you were 2 years ago? Yes. This is all going to turn out to be okay. Thank you so much. Give it up for that. Yes, for sure. Give it up for that. I love that. It's temporary. Give it up. Give it up. It's temporary and this will pass. Yes. Definitely. It's going to be bad, but it's going to get better. And again, how do we appreciate the better if we haven't been through the bad? Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll take one more. If there is. Yes, right over there. I love that. That's so important, especially as we're like in the weeds and in the thick of things. So I want you to imagine, you know, the pandemic just started and I was recognizing that as busy as life was getting for me, I was often really just not focusing so much on doing the work that I needed to do. And doing the work was healing from childhood trauma and working through some difficulty and some pain. And one of the things that I'd gone through was a situation with my father. Growing up, I love my dad. I was like really I had an affinity for this man, but it was really weird because what I realized that he himself was a broken person. And he himself was going through some really difficult things. And I saw how that translated into different areas and aspects of my life. And so this next poem is called My Father is a Broken Child. My father is a broken child, too afraid to face the mistakes of his past, too afraid to accept and acknowledge the children he scarred and wounded from his shattered pieces, too afraid to reconcile with his demons, to even look me in the eyes and accept that he was the reason his shallow heart nearly drowned my mother in the deep end. I empathize with what my mother had to endure. His words and his actions made her so insecure. I mean, clearly he's aged, but not matured. For so long, I walked around with a heavy heart and a sense of neglect. A juvenile delinquent with no sense of purpose. I was working for a love from my father because I felt I had to earn it. So I sought for ways to get his attention. After school detentions turned to suspensions and then getting arrested, just hoping he would sit and teach me a lesson, just sit and talk with me. Help me try to understand why I felt so awkwardly. I mean, I felt diseased, but I thought he could doctor me. But see, the older I get, the clearer I see him. Another broken child with little to believe in. After years of reflection, I called him to tell him that I forgive him because I expected things of him he wasn't given. I held him high on a pedestal he never even knew existed and then expected him to know it and live it. But see, our parents can only give us the best they know how. And I forgave him and I forgave myself because I know this now. So after pouring my heart over the phone, he was speechless. He hung up and then I heard a dial tone. But regardless, it was probably one of the most courageous things that I've ever done. And I'm so glad that my soul chose to be his son because they say smart people learn from their mistakes, but wise people learn from others. And because there are so many broken children, I refuse to raise another. Thank you. So the pandemic was a really interesting thing for me as things started. And it was really hard. It was really heavy, really difficult because in addition to what I was going through with my father, I was also recognizing how that bled into different areas and aspects. So, you know, as a child, I dealt with abandonment. As a child, just life circumstances and what happened. And I had to sit with myself, and I was by myself. I lived alone, and the pandemic hit. And here I was in the public eye, this very positive person doing so much for the community, being recognized, being celebrated, being honored. But here I am alone in my apartment by myself, going through the hardest and most difficult situation I've ever gone through. And I had to rebuild. It felt like I was starting all over again, like a caterpillar just fell out from the tree, trying to find my way back up. And it was a huge metamorphosis. It was a huge, huge, huge metamorphosis, a huge difficulty, very difficult challenge. And it all started actually back in 2018, but it became real in 2020. And I think the metamorphosis of it all was really being able to lean into my pain, learning how to love myself again, learning how to see myself in a different light, recognizing that what I'd gone through does not have to define me, but that it could design me. And it just was a very interesting process through a lot of different tools, building a morning routine, building a practice of self-care and self-love, meditating, doing yoga, journaling, doing therapy, psychotherapy. All of this will really help me to get into a space of seeing who I could be. There's so much more that I want to share, but I for the sake of time, so much more I want to share, but for the sake of time, all to say, when I really learned to love Randell again, all these opportunities started to open up, and I bet on myself. And I bet on myself in a very powerful way. And if there's something I want to share with you about life and with success, like just from my own experience, is there's something really beautiful about manifesting things into life. There's something beautiful about seeing it in your mind's eye, speaking it, writing it down, and then seeing it come to life, but believing it and kind of letting it go. And I was so fortunate last year that I was appointed as a Poet Laureate of Ontario because of all the work that it took to get there, because of all the transformation that I did. And then again, like I said, the butterfly emerged. But there's an interesting thing about the butterfly. There's an interesting thing after you kind of break out of the cocoon. It's painful breaking out of the cocoon. It's really painful. The process is painful because as you're coming out of the cocoon, ultimately who you were once is transforming. The inside of the cocoon is transforming so that you can become something new, but it is painful. That metamorphosis is painful. But I learned to lean into it, and by leaning into it, it really helped me kind of overcome and see what I had the propensity for. This was one of the books that really helped me as well. It's called The Authenticity Principle. And this is a book from Ritu Basin. She's actually from the GTA. And there's 3 different types of principles where she ultimately focuses, one, on your authentic self. We have our authentic self where you may have a friend that you feel really comfortable with to be yourself, to be open with, and just share all of who you are. And that is your authentic self. When no one else is with you and you can just be with yourself and be truly dedicated to who you are. That is your authentic self. Second is your performative self. Your performative self is sometimes you feel like you have to put on a mask, right? Feel like you have to put on a mask. And if I can be real, sometimes, even before the pandemic, I'd be the only person of color in the room sometimes. And I remember feeling like I had to put on a mask to be okay to kind of fit in, And it was really weird when I caught myself because I recognized this is not who you are, Randell. And sometimes it's easy to perform because you feel like you need to belong in certain spaces. And the third aspect is your adaptive self, which is a little bit of a blend between both, where you can be authentic, but you have moments where you can perform just a little bit, and that's the adaptive self. And for me, it was so transformative because I recognized what my authentic self looked like and what I could really do to keep and maintain my authentic self. And so just wanted to share that other book with you. Those are 3 books, and I'm happy to share at the very end if you have questions about the books as well. I learned through this process of transformation that I had to become a safe space for others. And we talk about safe spaces all the time. We talk about what it looks like to have a safe space, but usually we refer to it in a physical sense. And a safe space is physical in the sense where you feel safe being in a certain space. But if the people in that space are not safe, is that a safe space? So what I've learned is I have to be a safe space. I have to be safe enough that other people can come to me, that other people can be around me, because I'm one of those strong friends. I'm one of those people who I check in on a lot of people. I'm often there for people. So I recognized when I was going through my adversity that I also had to recognize that I had to be a safe space. And ultimately what I was looking for, I had to become that as well too. So I just wanted to share that key nugget. It really transformed the way I showed up, the way I became around other people and who I was, but also checking on your strong friends. Checking on your strong friends, checking on your strong friends. And if you are a strong friend, checking on yourself, and maybe have an accountability partner that can check in on you too. It's hard being strong and being there for everyone else. It's not easy. because you feel sometimes you can't go to the people that you often help because you feel like, I'm being vulnerable with you. And now you might use that against me, but check in on your strong friends. And if you have a strong friend, call them today, tell them how much you appreciate them, please and thank you. In this transformation, in this metamorphosis, I started to think, Randell, who do you want to be when this is all over? And I say this is all over, yes, after the pandemic, but also just in life. Who do you want to be? My first year political science prof said something to me that really changed my whole life. And he said, the worst thing that can happen to you when you pass is not passing itself. It is to be forgotten. And I'll tell you one thing. I don't care if people remember my name, but I hope that the impact that I have stays with people. I hope that it lives on beyond me. And two things in life are inevitable. One day we'll be born and one day we'll leave, but it has nothing to do with those two dates. It has everything to do with the dash in between. I often question if a coffin is where my legacy is destined. A rigor mortis reflection of me buried 6 feet deep in the six, my legacy, my soul, awaiting the arrival of 12 disciples and no remnants of me. No fruits of labor left from my seeds, not leaving this world better than when I came in. My name forgotten. Not even whispered upon the lips of those my actions impacted. It's scary. I heard once that the worst thing that can happen to us when we are no longer here is not death itself. It is to be forgotten. And I cringe at the thought of my efforts lost in coffins, boxed in the same confines that caused me problems, my life, my beliefs encrypted in tombstone, indicating the dates to and from. But I hope the dash in between represents more than just the good work I've done. My life blowing in the wind like the breath that has left my lungs, only to leave this world unfulfilled with holes in the potential that I was given. And respin in the same cycle to my children. See, when your time comes and your soul is sent, what will the dash on your tombstone represent? Thank you. So when I think about legacy, it brings me back to this question. What is your why? What is your why? What is your why? I know it's very difficult to think about purpose. It's very difficult to think about what your why is, but 3 things that I think you can ask yourself as often as you can. Who am I? How am I? And what is my purpose? Who am I? How am I? And what is my purpose? So huge, so important to be able to hone in on what that is. But I'm going to ask you again, what is your why? Because sometimes when life gets tough, it's easy to forget your why. When you're going through something, it's easy to forget your why. When you're being challenged by something, it's easy to forget your why. And honestly, if you forget, it's okay. Be there. Do what you need to do. Take care of yourself. Love yourself again, right? But there's something really important about what is that compass, that question of what your why is, that compass that can kind of bring you back and keep you going ultimately. What is your why? I think it's important to recognize that there's 7 billion different ways to look at happiness. And it's equally important to recognize that our definition of happiness will not be the same definition for someone else, but that we have to cultivate what our own definition of happiness is. A quote that I love says, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And I've literally dedicated myself to doing so. And I can guarantee you as advocates, which I'm sure all of you can attest to, and if you can't yet, if you dedicate yourself to serving, if you dedicate yourself to giving back to this world, to making an impact, I will guarantee you that the universe will bend over backwards. God, the universe, whatever it is you believe or whom you may believe in, will ensure that you get to where you need to get to. Because we're not here for ourselves. We're here for one another, right? And I can say I'm a testament to this quote. It's really helped me in quite a remarkable way, just focusing on this as well too. And one of the ways in terms of dedicating myself has been a process called design thinking. Any of you heard of design thinking before? Okay, a few of you have. I'm so excited to share this with you because I think it can be transformative. As we think of the next 10, I hope that this is a process and a framework that you can use to build what the next 10 years looks like, the next 20, 30, 40, 50. But in order to do so, we have to really understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So this is design thinking in a nutshell. First, we start off by empathizing. We empathize with those that we're looking to serve and support. We empathize because you want to understand what's happening. You don't want to just jump into a solution without really knowing what's going on. You don't want to create a solution without learning to love the problem. We have to learn to love the problem. And one of the ways is to empathize. Once we've empathized and had a better understanding of what it is, the next step is to define. You want to define what the problem is. Be very clear about what the issue is that you're looking to address and solve. From there, we move forward to ideating. We start ideating and thinking about what is it that we can possibly do. And the ideation process, you might start and you might have to go back because you realize that I didn't define the problem properly. But you ideate. Once you ideate, the next phase is that we prototype. We create something, a service, a product, a solution that may possibly help. From there, we test it. You might test it and realize you did it wrong. And you might have to go back, and that is okay. But if your focus is on serving, if your focus is on really learning to love the problem and creating a solution worthwhile, it's okay. It's an iterative process. You have to iterate every now and then, but design thinking. So I'm just going to break it down very, very, very quickly. First, we empathize. As I said, we start by empathizing, asking questions, doing research, getting a better sense of who it is you're looking to support, what the problem is that you're looking to address. Once you've done so, you define it. You define it by creating a problem statement. You define it by working with the people. Remember when I said earlier, working with, you work with the people you're looking to support. Right? We work with them. We don't tell them what we think they should do or how we think they should live their lives. We work with them to create a solution that we all feel with them is best suited for them. Once we define, we ideate. We ideate with them. Hopefully you ideate with those you're looking to support because they often have some really good ideas, but they just need the space sometimes. You know, the individuals need space to really be able to do so. As I mentioned, we prototype, we test it and see if it works. If it works, we can go into we prototype and then we can go into the phase of testing. But if you prototype and realize we have to go back, then as I mentioned, don't be afraid to go back. But then we test. Ultimately, we test. And I think design thinking is really huge in the space of thinking of what the next 10 looks like within the certain issues and certain challenges and adversities that you're looking to work with, especially within the mental health space, especially within this space. And I can't iterate how important this process is. And if you're not familiar, there's so much out there to learn about it, but this is what the next 10 looks like. And as I think about the next 10, and as I think about legacy, I think about this one aspect. And for me, what really inspires me to keep going, and I hope what can inspire you to keep going is, I remember thinking one day, I often look to my ancestors and my parents and my grandparents and what they've done to help me get to where I am today. And when I think about my legacy, I hope that my great-grandchildren will do the same. And if you choose to, if you're privileged to, if you're blessed enough, and if you want to have children, I think something that's really important to think about in the future is that one day you too are going to be someone's ancestor. And in being someone's ancestor, there's something really quite important to think about and reflect on. What does that look like, right? What does it look like to be someone's ancestor? How is it that you can create a path that makes it easier and smoother for others to walk? How do you create a path that makes it easier for them to navigate the same issues that you went through in a more succinct and possible way? And I have a last poem I want to share to kind of close, and then we'll open up for Q&A. And this poem is called Flowers. When I think about legacy, I think about the importance of giving love, the importance of spreading love, the importance of being someone that is rooted in love. And so flowers is not physically giving people flowers. It's about calling and telling people how much they mean to us. So I hope this poem resonates with you. Had the privilege of, I hope this poem resonates with you. One of the only things more difficult than death itself is to be forgotten. Or perhaps to plant like seeds and never see your roses blossom, to never unbox your gift before your coffin. We all deserve to be honored while we are still alive, to witness the budding gratitude of loved ones with open eyes. You deserve to be celebrated like you're already gone, to be given your flowers while they are still flourishing, while you can still smell the sweet scent of photosynthesis as your life branches out of the purpose you're rooted into and the fruits you've produced. So may I give you your flowers while they are still in bloom, a bouquet package delivered and handed to you in honor of the effervescent existence of your truth. May this be a reminder that your words and actions live on beyond being 6 feet and entombed. You are worthy of being handed yours while you are still alive. while you can still sniff the sweet fragrance of blossom in time, a reminder of how you bloomed before you were called to tomb. From darkness to light, how you passed on the baton for the next generation to take flight. A relay race of time between the lines of from and to. The legacy of how you actualized into truth. You have the right to leave this earth knowing that your presence was appreciated, that it made a difference, that it meant something to someone while there's still air in your lungs. What would it look like to normalize honoring those who mean something to us before they transition, so that they never question our love while they are still living? It's easy to take our loved ones for granted when we are caught up in our day-to-days. But in the same breath, the next breath is never guaranteed to stay. So before the leaves fall off of their trees and they branch out and reach into the heavens, let them know that they are a blessing, that their mere essence was a gift. May death never be the reason you appreciate the fact they lived. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. I believe it's now time for our Q&A. And please don't be shy. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So I think we're going to head to a virtual question first, if you don't mind. So this question's from Sarah. It says, how do you find that balance, having empathy for people who are hurt and hurting you, who don't want to grow out of their mindset while maintaining your boundaries and continuing your own upward growth?
That's a wonderful question, Sarah. And I think what I'll say to that is finding your balance starts with us. And questioning what is it that you're hoping to do for that person, but recognizing we're only responsible for ourselves, and that what someone else is going through, they have to be responsible for. We can create the platform for them. We can create the opportunity, but we're not responsible for their growth. We're not responsible for anyone else's growth. So if they want to, then great. If they don't, then that's okay. But finding balance for me to keep going when I know someone isn't quite there is just making sure when I start my day that I have a morning routine that at least gets me grounded, boosts my energy so I can go into spaces and thoughts and ideas and challenging situations to work with people. That's a great question, actually.
Thank you so much, Randall.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we can take one in-person question. That's what we have time for. So I'm not sure where you want to go, Taylor. But
awesome. Thank you, Taylor. All right, can we hear your name, please?
Hello. Hi, I'm Anjali. For one, thank you so much for sharing your story today. Really appreciate it. My question is just, have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome in being in all these amazing, incredible spaces and being on this amazing journey? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
That's a beautiful question. Imposter syndrome is something that is difficult, but I think what I would go back to is I recognize when it comes to identity, right? We really got to know who we are to the core of who we are. So much so we know what we love, what we don't love, and just really knowing ourselves. So again, who am I? How am I? What is my purpose? I think that's a great place to start. And secondly, I'd say there's two different ways to look at identity. There's our self-identity, and then there's our social identity. Our self-identity is how we choose to identify, whereas our social identity is how other people view us. So our self-identity is how we view ourselves. Social is how others view us. And I think imposter syndrome for me has often been what I think other people expect of me. And once I check that and recognize I'm moving and operating from my social identity, what I think people expect of me, then I can move into the space and say, okay, this is who I am, Randell. If you're not going to like me in certain spaces, then you're not going to like me. But I'd rather someone like me for who I am than to like me for who I'm not, and then pretend to be who I'm not so that they can like who I'm not. So I think that's how I deal with imposter syndrome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate, and I apologize. I didn't even realize the time was right here. I know that the Q&A was short, but I appreciate you all for listening and having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Randell. Thank you.